I would just write down in my calendar like yoga, 8 a.m. every day. And then the week would go by and it never would happen and I would feel frustrated with myself. And I wanted to get out of that cycle. And so in the process of trying to figure out, okay, I keep setting these self-care intentions, but I'm not actually following through, and I'm blaming myself and making it about me just being disorganized or dysfunctional and not being able to follow through. And I realized that no, it's actually due to a lack of time, a lack of energy, and a lack of space in my life to prioritize myself, especially as a mom and especially as someone who lives with chronic fatigue, chronic nightmares. Hey, I'm Mia Hemstad. I'm a wife, I'm a mom of 2 kids, and I'm a trauma-informed self-care coach. I also live with diagnosed PTSD and depression. I started sharing my mental wellness journey online in 2017 when I was diagnosed with postpartum depression and anxiety. And since then, I've heard from hundreds of women who all struggle with the same thing, putting ourselves last. This is a struggle that's keeping so many women burned out and unhappy, through no fault of our own, by the way. I've been working on my own healing as an abuse survivor since 2013. But when I became a mom, I really started to do the inner work of figuring out why I was putting myself last and how to start prioritizing myself for the first time in my life. This podcast is about sharing all of those lessons with you. So if you're interested in hearing honest stories, life advice, and inspiration that encourages you to make your health, happiness, and well-being a priority, then definitely stick around. Welcome to your No Longer Last journey. Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is how to free up time, energy, and space for your self-care. This is so important because without it, you actually can't practice self-care. Think about it. It's like you can be given all the ideas for self-care and even the resources, but if you don't know how to free up time, free up energy, free up space, it's never going to get actually plugged into your life. And that's why I always say that if it was as easy as just plugging it into your calendar, we would all be happy and well and frolicking through the meadow. But it's not that simple. And I ended up coming up with this surprise framework to help me remember to do this piece, because otherwise I would just write down in my calendar like yoga, 8 a.m. every day. And then the week would go by and it never would happen and I would feel frustrated with myself. And I wanted to get out of that cycle. And so in the process of trying to figure out, okay, I keep setting these self-care intentions, but I'm not actually following through, and I'm blaming myself and making it about me just being disorganized or dysfunctional and not being able to follow through. And I realized that no, it's actually due to a lack of time, a lack of energy, and a lack of space in my life to prioritize myself, especially as a mom and especially as someone who lives with chronic fatigue, chronic nightmares. So I created a framework that I call the 3D boundary setting framework, and it's because all 3 boundaries start with the letter D. That's decrease, delete, and delegate. And the reason why I break this down in this way is because boundaries, they're really a buzzword right now. They've been for the last couple of years. And I remember when I first learned about them, they were purely within the context of relationships. It was like that person is hurting you. You have a narcissistic person in your life or someone who is draining your energy. Learn to set a boundary with them. It was purely relationship focused, which was great. I mean, that freed up a lot of energy for me to learn how to set boundaries with people. But I realized that there was so much more that I was battling with on a day-to-day basis. And that's kind of when I started to dig deeper into the concept of boundaries and kind of redefine it for me as a means of setting up your life to protect your time, energy, and space so that you can take care of yourself. And so I really encourage you to think about boundaries in terms of these 3 types of boundaries: decrease, delete, and delegate. Because otherwise, it's really easy to fall into the narrative that is most prominent in the media right now, which is very focused on having really hard conversations with people, cutting people off in your life, or whatever people are talking about when it comes to boundaries. It can be really overwhelming, really scary, and not actually practical on a day-to-day basis. And I really want to bring in some nuance here and help us to see boundaries in this really approachable way so that we could actually practice them on a regular basis. So when I started to see boundaries in this way, I started to ask myself, instead of jumping straight to like shame and guilt and thinking that I'm just not managing my time well. I don't know about you guys, but I was always like, I'm just not managing my time well enough. I just need to wake up earlier, which was hilarious because I was breastfeeding 4, 5, 6 times a night. Who's waking up earlier when you're doing that? And literally no one. So this outdated idea that I just needed to try harder was complete crap. And I want to give you permission to admit that it's complete crap and that we need a better way to approach ourselves when we're not able to follow through on our self-care intentions and we're like struggling with that. And so it helped me get curious. It helped me build self-awareness, which I absolutely loved. And so instead of jumping to, okay, I'm not doing my yoga because I'm lazy or I'm not managing my time well enough, I actually would go, okay, my yoga didn't happen at all this week. That's probably due to the fact that I am a busy mom with mental illness and I have a lot on my plate. So what do I need to decrease, delete, or delegate? And then it would just start this flow of curiosity that would help me to automatically shift into problem solve mode in a very positive and constructive way. So let me break down what each of these 3 Ds mean. So decrease, pretty self-explanatory. It's how can you do less of something? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples there. Like an easy one for me to go to was I recognized that I was spending 2 and 3 hours every evening after the kids went to bed, cleaning the counters, washing the dishes, cooking, spending a lot of time cooking things from, beginning to end every evening, cleaning the nasty food that my kids would leave smeared all over their chairs at night so that we wouldn't get roach problems, vacuuming, sweeping, because again, kids leave so much food on the floor that I don't want to get bugs. And so 2 to 3 hours later after they went to bed, it would be 10:30 at night. And I was lucky if I got in a shower and then threw myself in bed from sheer exhaustion. So I was like, you know what? Why am I not batch cooking? Why am I using 3 pots and pans every time I make a meal? Why am I making these complex meals that cause me to spend all night having to clean up after them? So I decided that I was going to do 1-pot meals, that I was going to do sheet pan meals, that I was going to do, meals where you use 1 sheet pan, you cover the sheet with foil, and you're done. I was going to double batch. I'm sorry if I already said that, but I'm trying to make sure I don't miss it. That was huge because then I was only cooking every other day. And all of a sudden, every other day, instead of cleaning for 3 hours, I would do a quick tidy at night, and then I would have time to take a bath, and I would watch my favorite TV shows, and I would light a candle, and it was just like me time in my tiny little apartment bathroom, but it was mine, and it was glorious. And I started to wake up feeling a lot more refreshed and a lot less resentful and a lot less exhausted because I actually had a part of my day that was for me. And that all came from the silly little question, how can I decrease something in my life to free up some more time, energy, and space? And it was such a simple solution, but I had to really sit and think about it. Otherwise, we just live on autopilot. That's how we are wired as humans, to just default to our default autopilot setting, which wasn't serving me. And so it changed the way that I planned our meals for the week. It changed the way that I grocery shopped. I made sure to plan double batch meals, 1-pot meals, and I would buy double what I normally would so that I'd have enough for 2 days. And that freed up so much time and energy for me. And so now let's go on to delete. Delete is something that is a little bit more, not as tangible all the time. I mean, sometimes it is. Like maybe you are volunteering to do something and it's taking up a lot of your bandwidth and you don't have the bandwidth right now. It's not the right season for you to be volunteering for every single thing. So let's delete that commitment. But intangibly, but just as effective and important, is deleting certain beliefs that we have around certain parts of our lives. So for instance, I used to have a belief that if I had a babysitter, that I needed to be doing something work related, right? So if money's going out the door to hire this babysitter, then I need to be doing something to generate income. And that forced me to spend a lot of time and money, a lot of time and energy working all the time and never really taking time to just replenish myself physically, mentally, or spiritually. Like I just was constantly pouring out at all times. And there was a season of my life when my babies were infants and toddlers, and And I needed to be just like taking a nap, right? I was up all night breastfeeding and having all of those challenges. And, in that newborn phase, I had no business trying to like maximize my return on investment of having childcare. So permission to you to just learn from past Mia's mistakes and allow yourself to delete that belief, chuck it in the dumpster, set it on fire. It's not helping you. So examine where beliefs are, holding you back and causing you not to give yourself the time, energy, and space that you need. So I love that one. That one is very much, again, maybe it has something to only do with something inside of you, but again, what we think affects what we do, and it's super important. Don't skip it. And then the third one, decrease, delete, delegate, is very self-explanatory. Like, are you doing everything? Like, be honest with yourself. Because I know for me, I tend to take on a majority of the household responsibilities, like from a physical standpoint of actually physically doing the chores. But then when it came to the mental load, I was taking on 100% of it. So are we delegating some of that mental load? Are we delegating some of those household responsibilities? And are we seeing our home as our full responsibility, instead of a shared responsibility that we should have? Because you're not living in your house alone, okay? So you shouldn't be taking care of it alone. And so those 3 Ds, decrease, delete, delegate, are the 3 questions, the 3 types of boundaries that can help you protect your peace, protect your happiness, your health, your well-being. And that's how I want you to see boundaries. They are a way for us to protect. It's like, I don't know how to explain it. I don't like to call it a wall because that sounds so cold. But boundaries are just like these things that we can practice in our lives to protect our health, our happiness, our peace, and our well-being. So I always, I can't emphasize enough how important that is, because without actively making time and space, you are not going to be able to take care of yourself on a regular basis. And I think, I just really feel that when we really embrace this, we can stop judging ourselves so much. We can stop beating ourselves up, and we can stop with all the negative self-talk about why we're not able to do what we want to do. Because the women that I talk to, they're fully capable, wonderful people. And when they talk about their struggles, it's like I'm hearing, like they're saying that, maybe they need to try harder. But I'm hearing that they're dealing with their mom not leaving them alone, or being expected to host family, or, being shouldered with so much responsibilities at work, or dealing with really poor sleep issues. They are dealing with so much. And I'm like, have you stopped to consider what's actually on your plate? And can we first address how we can, set these different types of boundaries in your life so that you are better protected and better supported to actually make space? Because I guarantee you that the reason why most of us are struggling isn't because we're not trying hard enough. The reason why most of us are struggling is because we're spread way too thin. So that is why I think this piece is so important. And I remember when I first launched my coaching program, we were just focusing on self-care. I was giving tips, ideas, I shared the 4B framework, but I quickly realized that that wasn't enough, because I realized that before we can practice sustainable self-care, we all need to learn how to create space in our lives. And that's when this concept of boundaries came about. And that's when I kind of formalized it and gave it the 3D so that we can all remember it. And then I realized that we all kind of need this as a prerequisite to self-care. And so I encourage you to really practice this and know that it's not going to be figured out in one go, okay? It takes a lot of time to get comfortable setting boundaries. It 100% is something that causes a tremendous amount of discomfort, especially if you're not used to doing it. Because inherently, in order to do it, you have to start leaning into this belief that you are worthy of being supported, that you are worthy of being protected, and that your time and energy are valuable. And if you're a good girl, like most of us were raised to be, or if you're an abuse survivor, you know how hard it is to embrace those things and to really think those things about yourself. But the cool thing about boundaries is that you don't have to fully believe that you're worthy or valuable or worthy of being protected or any of that. necessarily to get started. And for me, it was actually the opposite. I wanted to believe I was worthy. And so I practiced setting boundaries. And it was actually through the action of setting boundaries that it was like, you know how that saying action speaks louder than words? It was like I was building my trust with myself, my relationship with myself by saying, hey, look, your actions, you're showing up, you're saying no, you're asking for support. By doing that, you're showing me that we matter. You're showing me that we're worthy of being protected. You're showing me that our time and energy are valuable. You're showing me that I deserve to have some time in my day that's just for me and my own joy and my own desire and my own needs. And it helped me to build up that relationship with myself. And so I just want to say that it can be an incredible tool if you struggle with low self-esteem and if you struggle with low self-worth. So don't think that you need to wait until you feel worthy to act like you're worthy. That the very act of it can actually help build that up, which is really, really cool. Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to say on that before I move on is the fact that, I didn't even know about boundaries until 2018, and it was in therapy that I learned about them. I remember talking about some challenges I was having with people in my life who were straight up using me, and it was literally causing me to have so many health issues due to the stress of this situation. And I was telling this therapist about this, like in the very beginning of one of our first sessions, and she said, have you ever heard about boundaries? Do you know what boundaries are? And I said, no, what are boundaries? And she introduced me to a book and I read it. I remember being absolutely astounded about boundaries. And I was like, I can do that? I didn't know that I can do that. Yeah. And that time with that therapist, I worked with her for a whole year. And I would say about once a month, I was setting a boundary in my life. And it was extraordinarily terrifying. And every time I did it, I'd be shaking. I'd feel like throwing up. And these were the really tough ones. These are the ones that were relationship based where I was having to tell people, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want to do that anymore. And these people were not nice people. So it did result in people lashing out at me and saying like, you are a bad person, you are selfish, you are, a lot of names that, us good girls really don't want to hear. We go our whole lives trying not to hear those things. And for the sake of my health and my happiness and my well-being, I had to stand my ground. And thank God I had a therapist in my corner. I was so lucky that my husband happened to just get a job that had good enough insurance that enabled me to see this therapist so that I could go weekly and cry on that couch and tell my therapist about the latest boundary I'd set and be reminded by her that I did the right thing, even though it felt so wrong at the time. And of course, looking back now, 5 years, I can say 100% I did the right thing. And I'm so grateful that I had that support. And I say all of this to say that if it feels really hard for you to set boundaries, number one, yeah, it will. It's not just you. It's very hard for us good girls to defend ourselves in that way. And number two, start small. Don't let this overwhelming Mount Everest of maybe telling a toxic family member that you don't want to deal with them anymore. Maybe that Mount Everest can be tackled a little bit later once you've had a little bit more practice. So start small. Where can you decrease, delete, or delegate things in your life that are more manageable and more doable? And go from there and let yourself build the muscle of setting boundaries. Like truly that year of 2018, I built that muscle and I have continued to have to work on building that muscle to this day. I would say that my husband and I, for instance, like I had to start letting him know that I'm tired of carrying the mental load and I'm tired of doing most of the chores in the house. And I would say it's been years of us having those difficult conversations and going to couples therapy and individual therapy to try to unpack all of that, because it's not as simple as just sharing what you're feeling sometimes, right? Especially when you have other people involved. And it's required, a lot of that kind of like mental load and stuff being piled on mothers is due to the patriarchal narrative that all of us were raised in. We're all functioning within that structure. And in order to build a new life where things are fair and there's space and time and energy for both of us to take care of our own needs, it requires a lot of dismantling of narratives that we were raised with. And so I just want you to know that while I do share these tips in easy to remember ways, it doesn't mean that they are easy to implement. So have a lot of grace with yourself as you stumble through practicing this for the first time. Yeah. And so I just want to say one more thing before we go to a break. And that's the fact that there's a tendency when we approach setting boundaries to fixate on everything that might go wrong. And I want to encourage you to think about all the things that could go right. This is something that I had to start doing in order to psych myself up to have difficult conversations, right? So for instance, with the toxic family member, which I know we don't like using the word toxic, but the person in my family who had toxic behaviors, the harmful behaviors, I was extremely scared to say anything to this person. And I had to focus on the fact that once I said what I needed to say and stop being used, that think about how much time and energy I would have back in my life. Think about what I could do with all of that time and energy, all the things that I could do to take care of myself, finally, for the first time in my whole life, in ways that I wasn't able to before because I was being used. And so even journaling on that and journaling about a life after the boundary is set and you've become comfortable in that new reality, what will you do with the additional time, energy, and space that you will have gained from setting that boundary? So, I would focus on the positive that could happen. And I also would reflect on the cost of not setting the boundary, of continuing to live in this awful state of letting myself be used or taken advantage of letting myself be walked all over by people. And I want you to realize that there's a true cost to staying silent. And that cost is wearing away at you, your body, your mind, and your soul, your health, your peace, everything. And to realize that by staying silent and stagnant, you're not preventing harm. You actually might be perpetuating it. And so it's really important to evaluate the cost and also reflect on how things can get better if you find the courage to set the boundary. That really helped me to set those really tough boundaries with certain relationships and even ending certain relationships, which I never take lightly. That was really good. And another benefit that came from that I think isn't talked about enough is learning how to set these boundaries bolstered my self-confidence and my self-esteem so much because I started to really feel that worthiness build up. And that then encouraged me to, set boundaries at work, tell my boss, this isn't a part of my job description. I'm not going to do it. And not care if they thought that I wasn't being a team player. It encouraged me to ask for a raise when more was being asked of me, and I got that raise. It encouraged me to quit a job that was grossly mistreating me, and then I landed a job that paid me twice as much for half the work. And, I'm not saying that these exact things are going to happen for you, but I just think it's important to point out the fact that when we have better self-esteem and better, self-confidence, and we practice our advocacy skills through boundary setting, we're able to bring that into our marriages, our workplaces, our relationships, and improve them for the better, or walk away if it's not going to improve. And we need to be honest with ourselves about that. So I really, those benefits of boundary setting really surprised me. I didn't think that was how I was going to build up my self-esteem which I desperately needed as an abuse survivor. You know, my boundaries were being violated since I was a little girl. I wasn't allowed to have boundaries. I wasn't allowed to say no. I wasn't even allowed to cry when I was being hurt in the grossest ways. And, you know, this has been so huge for me because here I am since 2018, putting my boundaries back in place and defending them fiercely. And that has been a really unexpected tool for my healing from abuse. So we're going to take a quick break. And I know that was intense, but we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to share a story from one of my clients. I share this story often, so maybe you've heard it, but it's really inspiring. It's a mama of 2 under 2, and it's about how she set all 3 types of boundaries we talked about in order to get more space and time in her life, and it's one of my favorites. So I'll see you after the break. Hey everybody, this is a reminder that my group coaching program, the No Longer Last Journey, is going to be reopening with special bonuses on October 1st. This is a really exciting opportunity if you are looking for additional support in your own healing journey. And I specifically want to talk about the coaching and community calls because there's a lot of different aspects to this program. It's a really big program. It's 12 months long. And if I tell you all the things that are in it, it would be a whole episode in and of itself. So I want to talk about the coaching and community calls, which we have every single month on the second Sunday of the month. And I'm going to start hosting a weekday call as well once I get new enrollments and figure out what time works for everybody. But basically, this is a 2-hour call where we do a mental health check-in. People share how they're doing, and it's a really beautiful time of connection and understanding and finally having a space to just share what's really going on with you. And then we move into journaling, and we use the prompts that I've been sharing with you over the last couple of weeks in the podcast. So we start with, how are you doing mentally, emotionally, and physically? We move into setting our self-care intentions with the self-care framework. And then we journal on these 3 types of boundaries: decrease, delete, delegate. I ask you, what do you need to decrease, delete, and delegate this month in order to make space for your self-care intentions? So it's a very well-rounded approach to journaling with journal prompts, and we all do it together for 20 minutes, and then we share what came up or what we are hoping to do, or maybe, and a lot of times what happens is someone will share, you know, I know that I need to set this boundary, but I'm not sure how. Mia, like, what advice do you have for me? And so there's the coaching aspect of the call where if anyone is dealing with an issue or a challenge, I'm there to provide coaching, mentorship, and support to help you through that. And that happens every single month. And I really love that because I think that we all need that community aspect when it comes to our healing. We all need to know that we're not alone, and something about journaling together and sharing together our mutual desire to heal and grow and break generational cycles of trauma and improve our relationships with ourselves. And I really see people grow over time, month after month, as they come to these calls and regularly touch base with themselves once a month. It brings in that accountability aspect because let's be real, like, how many of us are actually stopping in our months to do that kind of wellness check? So yeah, if that sounds cool to you, that's one aspect of this 12-month long coaching program. And you can go learn more about it at a link in my description. It's miahemstad.com/no longer last. And I'll be emailing all the details about the special bonuses to my email list. So make sure you're on that as well. I will put that in the show notes. It's miahemstad.com/letter. All right. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. Okay, so I love this story. It demonstrates like how simple this boundary setting like approach can be in like a practical everyday setting. So I have a client who, this was several years ago, she was really struggling to find time for herself. She was working part-time. She had 2 kids under 2 years old, a newborn and, you know, a toddler that wasn't even 2. And she was just like, I am spinning my wheels. I am trying really hard to take care of myself, but I can't even get to the basics. I'm lucky if I even shower or have time to watch a show before I go to bed. And so I asked her to walk me through her typical day. And she said that she, you know, gets the kids ready for the sitter. She goes to work. Then she comes home, makes dinner, washes the dishes by hand. and then sweeps the floor and gets the kids to bed. And by that point, she's so exhausted. It's about 9 or 10. And then she just like takes a shower and goes to bed. And I had been through something quite similar actually when my kids were babies. And I asked her, why are you washing your dishes by hand? Are you, do you not have a dishwasher? And she said, no, I have a dishwasher. And I'm like, well, can you tell me why you don't use it? She said, well, when I was a kid, my mom told me that I wasn't allowed to run the dishwasher unless it was full. Oh my word, you guys. I had a very similar experience. And I also was told that I wasn't allowed to put big pots or pans in there because that wastes space that could be used for plates and bowls. So I made myself hand wash pots and pans, and I would hand wash dishes for like an hour because I couldn't let myself use the dishwasher. And it sounded like my client was going through something similar. She walked me through that memory of like being told you're not allowed to do that. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. Or no, it's a waste of water. It's a waste of electricity. It's a waste of money. And, I was like, you know what? I've been through something similar. And I said, how much time would it save you if you just threw everything in the dishwasher and turned it on without caring about whether or not it was full? She was like, I probably would get a whole hour back in my evening. And I was just like, can you give yourself permission to value your time that much that you would rather run the dishwasher for the sake of your own health and happiness than continue to perpetuate this narrative that was handed to you, when you were a kid? And perhaps when she was a kid, like they needed to save that money. I grew up pretty poor, and I know that my mom was trying to save as much money as possible. She didn't have a job. She did what she could. And so I get it, but we're not talking about, this isn't about whether or not our parents' advice was valid or if it's valid now. This is about doing what you need to take care of yourself right now. Because at the end of the day, you're the grown-up now. We're not kids anymore. And we have to pump the brakes and take a step back from our programming and ask ourselves, is this how I want to continue to live? Is the way that I am living supporting my well-being? And, I was like, what would you rather believe about your time instead? And she was like, well, I would rather think that my time is more valuable than this. And I would rather run the dishwasher every night and have time to myself than waste time hand washing everything. And we know that it's easier said than done, right? This is deep childhood programming over, what women are supposed to spend our time on. And I know for me, I spent a long time overcoming that. But it was a start. And she was like, you know what? I'm going to practice giving myself permission to run the dishwasher and see it as an act of self-love and self-care. I'm like, great. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. And then I said, okay, how long did it take you to sweep the floor? She's like, it takes me about like 45 minutes to go through the whole house and like sweep the living room and sweep the kitchen. And I'm not going to tell her, oh, just don't sweep the floor, because when you have a toddler, they literally, no matter how hard you try, get food everywhere. And if you don't want to have a roach problem or a bug problem, you have to clean the floor every night. So I said, hey, I recently bought a robot vacuum. It's the most expensive thing I've ever bought in my life. And it's like, besides a laptop, and it's the most expensive house gadget for sure that I've ever bought. I was like, it was $400. However, now I just put that sucker down at night and I press a button and it cleans the floors better than I do. And it's given me back 45 minutes a night. And my back pain, I don't have all this back pain from like sweeping the floor or lugging a vacuum back and forth over and over again. And I was like, is that something that you could look at your budget, even if you saw it as an early Christmas gift? Could you get a robot vacuum? How much time would that save you? And she was like, oh my goodness, that would save me like 45 minutes a night. And so she was like, you know what? I'm going to try these things. And I was like, I want you to remember that you were raised to believe that your time was best spent doing all these household chores, that that's what you were meant to do. And you have to now create a new belief that your time is better spent doing things that make you happy and doing things that take care of your needs. And so whenever you feel uncomfortable, I want you to affirm to yourself, I am worthy of this support. I am worthy of this time. I give myself permission to make things easy so that I can take care of myself. So always working on the mindset aspect, always working on the affirmations to help back us up when things get hard. And she came back a month later and was like, Mia, those tips that you gave absolutely worked. She said that she had about 2 extra hours every night back into her life because she had a robot vacuum and she ran the dishwasher no matter what. And on top of this, she went ahead, she had Fridays off from her part-time job. She worked Monday through Thursday with Fridays off. She decided that instead of taking her kids out of childcare on Fridays, to pay for all 5 days so that she could have Fridays without her kids and without work. Fridays were a day where she could do whatever lit her up, whatever fed her soul, whatever she needed. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, I wish I had the awareness to do that when my baby was a newborn and when I had a 2-year-old, because kids need so much from you during that time. You have to be replenishing yourself in a much bigger way. And weekends are not relaxing for moms. I don't care what anybody says. We are doing the laundry, and we're doing family activities like that. That can be fun, but it's not replenishing. And so for her to take the additional effort to go, I'm going to give myself permission to have childcare just so I can have a real break, was the epitome of starting small and then going big with her boundaries. And she decided to delegate childcare on a day when she wasn't working. And of course, she acknowledges that that's a financial privilege and all of these things. But how often are we forcing ourselves to make things harder than they need to be more frugal than we need to be, because we're not valuing our time, our energy. We're not valuing our own peace and happiness. And she said that it really helped her to find a balance in her evenings so that she could take care of herself on a regular basis and not just when she was teetering on the edge of burnout. So I found that to be a tremendous practice of all 3 types of boundaries. I mean, deleting the idea that she was meant to spend her entire evening cleaning the kitchen as a woman and as a mother. She decreased the amount of work she was doing every night by using her dishwasher and buying a robot vacuum. And she was delegating her childcare on a day when she, could have told herself that she should be, right? Oh, I should be with my kids. They shouldn't be in childcare on the day that I'm not working. I should be spending it with them. And it was a half day. She spent they would be in childcare from 9 to 1, and she would pick them up and then spend the rest of the day with them, feeling more present as a mom, feeling more replenished as a person. And so I love how she rewrote these narratives for herself so that she could show up for herself, her work, and her family so much better than when she was running around living by these old beliefs from her childhood and continuing to try to be, a good woman, a good mom, or whatever society, placed on her and telling her how she should live, which was not serving her at all. So I absolutely love that story, and I hope that it can inspire you to look at your life and ask yourself where you can decrease, delete, and delegate to make more time and space for you and your needs. So that's the end of this week's episode. The affirmation I want to leave with you today that I will be sending in a beautiful phone background that you can use as a screensaver and remind you every day to repeat this affirmation to yourself. And it is, you are your best advocate. Don't be afraid to speak up for your wants and needs. You are your best advocate. Don't be afraid to speak up for your wants and your needs. And today's action of the week, or self-care practice of the week, is to set a boundary, or, at least decide what you need. Start the reflection process. What boundary are you going to set this week? What are you going to decrease? What are you going to delete? What are you going to delegate? And remember, it doesn't have to be, rewriting your entire childhood story with all the traumas and the negative limiting beliefs and narratives that you have going on. It could be as simple as what my client did, which was giving herself permission to run the damn dishwasher and have some more time for herself. So don't overcomplicate it. Start small. You can always email me what your boundary is, or you can post on Instagram and tag me at Mia Hemstad. I would love to cheer you on and encourage you. But yeah, practice with me. Let's set a boundary this week and take the next step in our own healing journeys. So that's all I have for you for today. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode or listening in. I really appreciate you, and I will see you next week. Bye.